I wanted to see if I could automate virtual machine deployments. I've set a few rules. No pressure. All right, our new workflow is working correctly. It's generating VM names, but it still only knows how to create one VM at a time. So in this video, we're going to learn how to fix that by implementing looping. Now, there are a variety of ways you can create these loops, but let me introduce you to several of them. Again, if we go to the schema tab, that's where we can see the schema elements that we can add into our workflow. One way we could do this is uses something called the for each schema element. Unlike this schema element that calls a workflow once, the for each schema element will call the same workflow multiple times. So that's a newfangled way of creating a looping functionality, but we're going to do things a bit old school here. What we're going to do is create what I call an old-fashioned loop. Newfangled loops and old-fashioned loops are both equally valid. I oftentimes prefer using the old-fashioned approach because it ultimately gives me more control. That, and I'm an old crusty guy, and teaching an old crusty guy new tricks like this for each element, oh, that may just be too much for me. So how do you create a loop? Well, the way we're going to create a loop is going to involve a decision. You'll notice these decision schema elements, which allow our workflow to branch one way or another, come in different flavors. The one that we want here is just a decision. I'm going to drag a decision into my workflow, drop it on the arrow there, and you'll notice that a decision schema element has two arrows coming out of it, a green arrow and a red arrow. We like to call the green arrow the true path and the red arrow the false path. You'll find out why here in a moment. And ultimately what's going to happen here is, let me rearrange things here a bit, is we're going to want the workflow to loop back on itself. So notice how we have a loop here. We're going to create a loop. The way we're going to do that is we're going to delete this end schema element. Notice that's going to delete not just the end, but it's also going to delete this arrow. So let's delete the end schema element. And oh no, how am I going to get an arrow to point to the decision schema element? Well, that's simple. You just hover on the schema element at the end of the line, click on this little arrow, click and hold and drag, and you can create an actual loop. So conceptually, what's going to happen here, let me actually change the label on this decision. I'm going to say that this decision is going to ask more VMs. In other words, we're going to loop multiple times and we need to know when to end. As long as the code that we enter into this decision says, yep, there's more VMs to create, we're going to follow the green path. On the other hand, if the decision decides, nope, you've created as many as we wanted, then we'll follow the red path. Now, there's one key thing that we're going to need to do here. There's two key things. We're going to have to write some code here to perform the test. And that test is going to depend upon that counter variable that we saw before. So we're going to have some way of incrementing that counter. Why don't we do the counter part first, because this is pretty easy. Now, you can do this different ways, but there is a schema element called, I believe it's in the basic section. There is a schema element called, where's it hiding? Where's it hiding? There we go. Increase counter will take a counter variable. Doesn't have to be called counter, but it'll take a counter variable and increment its value. Just like the other schema elements, we have to set up the inputs and outputs here. In this case, it's super simple. We need to set up our counter variable as input, and our counter variable also needs to be an output. We're setting up our counter variable as an input, so this schema element can see what the current value is, and we're setting up our counter variable as an output so that this schema element can change the value. And as you can see from the label on the icon, it's going to bump up the counter value by 1. Excellent. We added a loop to our workflow, but we're not quite done. There's something crucial that we still need to do, and that's to write some code to implement the test of the decision. So join me in the next video and I'll show you how to write that code.